Jamaica passes 2 tests from the International Monetary Fund (IMF).
Program implementation thus far has been strong.
Omnibus legislation to govern the tax reform process.
By committing to lower rates across the board and incentivizing production.
And a public sector transformation on in earnest following a wage freeze.
We have the skills in the service and we must get to work and make sure that we transform Jamaica to make it a place to do business easily.
Those were just some of the top achievements of the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Public Service as the government acted on strategic priority number 1, fiscal prudence and the pursuit of a credible economic program. It's all about reforming the economy, reducing Jamaica's debt, revving up production, and placing the country on a path to economic growth and prosperity. Having secured a 4-year extended fund facility with the IMF in May 2013, the government was on a mission to ensure it met all targets to maintain the deal worth $958 million. Subject to quarterly tests by the multilateral agency, Jamaica met all quantitative targets and structural benchmarks for both the June and the September periods.
The execution of the 2013-14 budget has been broadly on track, and more generally, overall policy implementation under the program has been strong.
The Program Monitoring Committee, co-chaired by President and CEO of Sagicor Life Richard Biles and Bank of Jamaica Governor Brian Winter, keenly monitored the IMF agreement. But the route to the IMF agreement was contingent on some prior actions, passing the Public Debt Management Bill, participation in the National Debt Exchange (NDX), tax reform, and a weight restraint agreement between the government and the public sector unions. Having passed the Public Debt Management Bill in November 2012, in 2013, the government turned its attention to the NDX. It required government bondholders to exchange their old instruments for newer ones at a lower interest rate and an extended maturity date. The 99% participation in the NDX saved the country approximately $17 billion in interest payments, thereby reducing the national debt. With tax reform being a critical part of the country's economic reform program, government moved full speed ahead with the required legislation to revise the tax incentive program. On November 19, 2013, 4 pieces of legislation, including the Fiscal Incentives Miscellaneous Provisions Act and the Income Tax Relief Large-Scale Projects and the Pioneer Industries Act, were passed in the lower house of Parliament. They support a policy of granting waivers to the primary inputs to production, those things that are used to produce goods or services.
The new generalized regime will allow for uniformly reduced rates for all tax-compliant investment bodies and corporate entities and individuals involved in productive activity. This should also serve to enhance the competitiveness of the overall economy.
The House of Representatives also passed the Charities Act in October, which would regulate all charitable organizations operating in the country. Containing public expenditure was also a major goal of the government in the year that was. Critical to that objective was an agreement with a number of trade unions to provide public sector workers with several benefits in lieu of salary increases between April 2012 and March 2015. Other interventions continued to push public sector transformation.
To transform the public sector, you have to transform it to make it more responsive to the service that it gives to the public and to make Jamaica competitive.
Part of that involved Jamaica Customs being changed to an executive agency so that it could effectively carry out its operations. And on the issue of pension reform, Parliament started the debate on the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Validation and Amendment Act. Pension reform, which involves public sector workers contributing to their pensions, should be implemented by April 2016. No new taxes were announced by the Finance Minister when he opened the budget debate on April 18. So as part of the fiscal responsibility regime, the goal was to encourage tax compliance.
It will involve legislative changes and greater powers for the tax authorities to go after the taxes due and secure it from the persons from whom those taxes are due.
And that promise was fulfilled. The Revenue Administration Amendment Act was passed to promote compliance in all sectors of the economy through increased access to information. Government also completed the rollout of a central treasury management system ahead of schedule. 30 sites were identified to be incorporated into the system, which resulted in substantial savings to the consolidated fund.
All those sites are now online, and the government of Jamaica is not holding those balances any longer in the private financial institutions and borrowing the money at great cost to us.
With the key components of the government's economic reform program in full swing, the Jamaican economy is projected to record 1% growth for the October to December quarter. This followed a similar expansion in the previous quarter, which, coupled with an excellent performance under the IMF agreement, positioned the country to receive some $300 million from the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank (IDB) by March 2014. And in September, Jamaica received a $951 million grant from the European Union (EU) for direct budgetary support.
These additional funds will be very helpful in tackling, because these are the funds that have not been tied to anything, will definitely help the government to tackle its priorities.
Jamaica also received $2.6 billion in grant funding from the EU to improve services in the health sector. As the government focused on being financially responsible in the year 2013, it was convinced that privatizing key state entities would improve public service and make the state more financially secure. The Development Bank of Jamaica (DBJ) announced in September that Wallingford Coffee Company was sold to AIC International Investments Limited in a deal worth about $4 billion. 3 entities were also shortlisted for the divestment of the Kingston Container Terminal, DP World, PSA International, and the Terminal Link Consortium. Enterprise teams were also shortlisted for the Norman Manley Airport, the Jamaica Railway Corporation, and Caymanas Track Limited. Expanding the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises (MSMEs) was just as important to the growth of the economy. $2 billion was allocated to the DBJ to lend to businesses in the sector. Up to June 2013, $1.3 billion was disbursed. The DBJ also announced plans to launch a venture capital fund within the first half of the next fiscal year, which begins April 1, 2014. The Jamaica Venture Capital Program, being implemented in collaboration with the IDB, will help develop equity financing to provide funding options for MSMEs.
What we want to do is to encourage businesses to get into the investment.
Larger investment projects like the North-South Highway, the Logistics Hub Initiative, diversification of tourism markets, and the Agri-Parks project are also critical elements underpinning the government's growth agenda. Fiscal prudence and pursuit of a credible economic program, strategic priority 1 for the government. Under the supervision of the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Public Service, the government was financially responsible in the year 2013 while embarking on a realistic program to grow the economy.